Hi, I'm Venora. I showed up to my family's grand celebration, dressed in my best, clinging to the last bit of pride I had left, only to hear them whisper, "There's the useless girl who never amounted to anything." And then, in front of everyone, my brother's mistress sneered, "Security! Get her out of here!" They humiliated me like I was nothing, but they had no idea what I'd do next. Before we dive in, tell me, what time are you listening to this, and where are you? Drop a comment below. I want to know who's here with me as I tell you how I turned their betrayal into their nightmare. I drove up to the hotel slowly, my old Honda humming nervously among the quiet, polished purr of luxury sedans and sports cars lined up at the valet. The attendants didn't even glance at me until I put the car in park. One young man forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, clearly used to seeing only the elite here. I smoothed my dress, a simple navy sheath I'd found on clearance, and touched the single strand of pearls around my neck. They had been my mother's. I always wore them to family events. They were my only armor left in a world where I felt invisible. Inside, the ballroom glowed like a palace. Gold drapes shimmered under the soft lighting, and champagne glasses glistened in towers taller than me. Guests moved like a flock of exotic birds, bright, expensive, untouchable. The sound of laughter and clinking glasses felt deafening, though no one was laughing with me. I walked in, heels tapping against the marble floor, scanning for a familiar face, a safe corner. Instead, I caught the first whisper. "There she is," a woman's voice hissed, sharp as glass. "The useless one, the one who never amounted to anything." I froze. It wasn't subtle, it was meant to reach me. My chest tightened, but I kept walking, shoulders back, pretending I didn't hear. That had always been my way, swallow it down, smile, keep moving, but inside it felt like their words were knives, carving out whatever dignity I had left. Another voice followed, a man this time. "Why is she even here? She doesn't belong at this kind of event." They didn't know how their words echoed through me. Or maybe they did. I touched my pearls again, the smooth beads grounding me. Mom would have told me to breathe, to stand tall. But Mom wasn't here anymore. Then I saw her. Marceline. She stood near the entrance to the VIP area, wearing a dress that cost more than my car, smirk already painted on her face. She didn't bother to lower her voice. "Oh, look who finally crawled out of whatever hole she lives in." She raised her hand dramatically, signaling to the nearest staff. "Security!" she called out, her voice ringing through the room. "Get her out of here!" I blinked. My throat tightened, but no words came out. For a second, I thought I'd misheard. But no, everyone had turned to look. The guards hesitated, clearly uncomfortable, but they did as told. "Excuse me, ma'am," one said softly, as if that would make it hurt less. I didn't resist when they gently took my arm. I couldn't. My body had gone stiff, locked in that old familiar response. Freeze. My brother, Damon, stood near the stage, chatting with a group of men in suits. He looked right at me, and did nothing. He just turned away, like I wasn't his sister, like I wasn't anything at all. The humiliation wasn't just in being escorted out. It was in knowing every person in that room had witnessed it. People who knew my family, business partners, friends. And none of them stopped it. Outside, the evening air hit me like a slap. The hum of traffic felt distant compared to the storm inside my chest. I stumbled toward the far end of the parking lot, needing distance from that place. Leaning against my car, I clutched my necklace like it could hold me together. "All these years," I whispered to no one. "All these sacrifices, for what? To be treated like this?" I stared at my reflection in the car window. I didn't even look like me anymore. Just someone hollow, standing on the edge of breaking. My eyes burned, but I refused to let the tears fall here, not where anyone could see, not for them. I breathed deeply, forcing the anger down until it sat still inside me. Then, softly, I said it out loud. This is the last time they humiliate me. I unlocked my car, slid behind the wheel, and sat in silence for a long moment. Then I started the engine. I walked away in silence, but my silence had a purpose. I drove straight home and with shaking hands opened my laptop, not to cry, but to act. The ride back had been silent except for the hum of the tires on the freeway. No music, no phone calls, just me, staring at the road, replaying every moment of that night on a loop. The whispers, Marceline's smirk, Damon's eyes meeting mine before he deliberately turned away. When I walked into my house, the air felt colder than usual, though I knew it was just me, hollowed out, furious, running on fumes. I went to my home office and flicked on the light. The soft glow illuminated the framed photos on the bookshelf, smiling family portraits from years ago when we all still pretended we were close. I wanted to rip them down, but instead, I unclasped the pearl necklace and set it gently on my desk. It felt like laying down the last piece of my old self. Those pearls were Mom's. They had been my connection to her, to our family's so-called legacy. Tonight, they were just a reminder of everything I'd lost. I sank into my chair, staring at the computer screen as my hands hovered over the keyboard. They called me useless. But I wasn't useless when I paid off Damon's debts. I wasn't useless when I co-signed the loans for his business ventures, or funded the trips that kept our family's perfect image alive. I had been the quiet foundation, the invisible lifeline, and they threw me out like I didn't matter. Enough. I pulled up the bank accounts. One by one, I began freezing every joint account I shared with Damon or any of the family members who had taken my silence for granted. My fingers moved quickly, deliberately, canceling the credit cards linked to them. I could almost hear Damon's voice in my head. Don't make things harder than they need to be. But I didn't pause. They had lived off my back for years, calling it supporting the family, when really it was exploitation. The clicking of the keyboard became rhythmic, like a heartbeat. Each cancellation, each freeze was a cut, severing the strings they'd used to control me. Then came the big one. I picked up my phone and scrolled to my financial advisor's number. It was late, but I didn't care. He answered groggily, his voice tinged with confusion. "Venora? Is everything okay?" "No," I said flatly. "Sell my stake in Sterling Co. All of it, first thing tomorrow." There was a pause, then a startled, "Wait, you mean the 27 million? Venora, are you sure? This isn't a decision to make lightly. It could destabilize—" "Good," I cut in. Let them panic. It's their turn to feel powerless." He hesitated again, his voice dropping into that professional tone people use when they're trying to calm someone who's being emotional. "You don't have to do this tonight. Sleep on it. We can discuss in the morning." "No," I said firmly. "Do it. I'm not giving them one more night of thinking they can own me." When I hung up, my heart was pounding, but not from fear, from clarity. Almost immediately, my phone buzzed. One missed call from Damon, then another. Then the texts started coming in. "What did you do? Call me now." "Are you out of your mind?" I didn't answer. I put the phone face down on the desk, letting it vibrate against the wood. It was almost satisfying, imagining his panic growing with each minute I stayed silent. My silence wasn't weakness anymore. It was strategy. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. For years, I thought keeping the peace meant keeping quiet. Tonight, I learned that silence can be a weapon. I got up, walked to the window, and looked out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, Damon was scrambling, Marceline was probably fuming, and for once, I didn't care. They'd built their empire on my quiet compliance. By the time they realized what I'd done, their empire would already be crumbling. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I prepared for the battle I knew was coming. By the time the sun came up, my body felt like it was moving on autopilot. I made coffee, but it just sat there on the kitchen table, steam fading into the cold morning air. I couldn't bring myself to drink it. My hands wrapped around the cup for warmth, but I felt nothing but the dull ache of exhaustion. The words wouldn't stop echoing in my head. She's useless. Damon's voice, so casual, so dismissive, as if I were nothing more than a stray thought. I'd heard those words before, in different forms over the years. Last night only made me realize that they weren't just an insult hurled in the heat of the moment. They were part of the narrative my family had built about me. A story they told everyone, maybe even themselves, until it became the truth they believed. I stared at the pearl necklace lying on the counter where I'd left it the night before. It was the last piece of my mother I had, the last token of when I thought family meant safety. I remembered the way she used to adjust it on my neck before big events, smiling as if her approval was enough to shield me from everything else. I had spent years believing her when she said, "You're better off helping your brother. It's his legacy." Back then, I thought sacrificing my own ambitions for Damon was noble. Now, I realized it had been the start of my erasure. That realization opened the floodgates. Memories came pouring back like a storm. I remembered the gala where I had spent months drafting contracts that saved Sterling Co. millions. I sat in the audience that night, proud and hopeful, ready to hear my name acknowledged in front of people who mattered. Damon stood on stage, flashing his perfect smile, and thanked our brilliant team while taking every ounce of credit for himself. I clapped like everyone else, hiding the sting behind my polite smile. I remembered the family dinners where I tried to talk about my own plans, starting a consultancy, pursuing work outside of Sterling, but Mom shut me down every time. "Don't get distracted, Venora," she'd say, with that tone that made it sound like advice, but felt like a command. "Your place is with family. You're better off helping your brother." I didn't notice then how those words chipped away at me, reshaping me into someone who existed only in the margins of their story. The bitterness burned as I walked to my office and opened my personal drive. My hands shook slightly as I clicked through old files, emails, loan agreements, introductions I facilitated that brought in investors. It was all there. Proof that I wasn't just a bystander in building the company. I had been the scaffolding, the quiet backbone. Every time they built higher, I whispered to myself, I was the scaffolding they tore down after the ribbon cutting. My phone buzzed on the desk, pulling me out of the spiral. Damon. Again. This time I let it go to voicemail, but curiosity made me listen. His voice oozed false concern, the kind that used to make me doubt myself. "You're overreacting, Venora. This isn't you. Come back to the table and we'll talk like family. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." Talk like family. I almost laughed at that. Family doesn't watch you get humiliated and turn their backs. Family doesn't let you bankroll their empire while they paint you as useless. I deleted the voicemail before it finished. If I let them talk, they'd make me believe I imagined my pain. They'd twist the story until I was apologizing for their betrayal. I grabbed my journal and sat at my desk. My hand trembled as I started writing, but once the first words hit the page, they wouldn't stop. This isn't just about money, it's about reclaiming the narrative they wrote me out of. That sentence hit me like a lightning bolt. For years, I let them define who I was. The helper, the quiet one, the useless one. But if they wanted to pretend I never built this empire, I'd show them exactly what it looked like without me. By noon, I had a plan, one that would force them to face me on my terms. I walked back into my office, the weight of the morning's reflection still sitting heavy on my shoulders, but my mind sharper than it had been in years. My fingers hovered over my phone for a moment before I pressed the contact I'd been avoiding for weeks. "David," I said as soon as he answered, skipping pleasantries. "Liquidate my stake in Sterling Co. Every cent, effective immediately." There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of silence that says someone's trying to gather the courage to argue. "Venora, that's $27 million. Are you absolutely sure about this?" I leaned back in my chair, staring out the window at a world that suddenly felt different. "I've never been more sure of anything," I said. My tone didn't waver. He sighed. "This is going to cause a storm. Damon, your family—" "That's the point, David," I cut him off. "It's time they learned what it feels like to live without my quiet support." Once we hung up, I didn't give myself time to second guess. I immediately dialed Rebecca. She had been my attorney for years, quietly advising me through the endless fine print Damon loved to toss my way. She picked up quickly. "Venora, I heard some rumblings about last night. Are you okay?" "I'm fine," I replied, my voice as even as I could make it. "But I need your help. I'm pulling out, and I want it airtight." Rebecca didn't respond right away. Then, carefully, "You do realize this move will trigger chaos? They'll come after you, Venora. Damon won't let this go quietly." "Good," I said, the bitterness I'd been swallowing for years finally spilling into my words. It's time someone did. For the next hour, I sat with her on the phone as she laid out the legal steps. We went over asset freezes, withdrawals, and the protocols for notifying the board. With each decision, I felt another invisible chain fall away. After hanging up, I moved quickly. I logged into the online portals for every joint account, every family-controlled fund Damon and my mother had access to. One by one, I froze them. The little click of confirmation on each transaction felt like exhaling for the first time in years. It didn't take long for the phone to start ringing again. Damon, then our mother, then Damon again. I ignored them all. And then, a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something in me wanted to know how far they'd stoop. "Venora," came the voice I least expected. Marceline, Damon's mistress. Her tone dripped with false sympathy. "I thought we should talk, woman to woman. Damon didn't mean what he said, he's just under pressure." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "Tell Damon," I said slowly, "that he just lost his leash. And don't call this number again." I hung up before she could stammer out whatever excuse she had prepared. When the room went quiet again, I turned to my desk. This part wasn't just business, it was war. I opened the folder I'd started years ago, the one with copies of every loan agreement, every email where I'd been the invisible hand holding Sterling Co. together. Receipts of my contributions that had been brushed aside like they didn't exist. Piece by piece, I organized everything into a single document. Evidence. My voice, finally on paper. Then I drafted the letter, my formal withdrawal from Sterling Co. I CC'd every member of the board, scheduled it to hit their inboxes at just the right moment when they'd be least prepared. By the time I was done, my hand ached from typing, but I felt lighter. Not free, not yet, but no longer bound by the role they'd shoved me into. By tomorrow morning, they wouldn't just know I'd left the table. They'd know I'd taken it with me. But that night, as I prepared for war, the weight of it all finally came crashing down. The house was unbearably quiet, save for the occasional hum of the refrigerator. I sat in the kitchen, the only light coming from the small lamp over the sink. A glass of wine sat untouched in front of me, deep red and still. My hands rested on the cool surface of the table, fingers tracing small, meaningless patterns, as if that would stop my mind from spiraling. It hit me how hollow this house felt now. Every wall, every piece of furniture was paid for with the money I'd poured into the family, into Sterling Company, into Damon's so-called vision. And now, it felt like none of it belonged to me, like I was a tenant in a space I'd built. I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. How did I let it get this far? I whispered to no one. The memories came uninvited. Late nights bailing them out during the 2008 crisis, mortgaging my inheritance just to keep the company payroll going. I remembered sitting in the bank lobby, signing away the last piece of security I had while Damon was probably sipping champagne at some networking dinner. At the time, I'd told myself it was temporary, that one day they'd see my worth. But now, all I heard in my head was his voice. She's useless. I closed my eyes, and for a moment I almost believed it. Maybe that's all I was. The girl who wrote the checks. The one who kept the lights on but never had her name on the marquee. I didn't even realize I was crying until I felt the tears hit my hands. They came fast, ugly, and uncontrollable, years of being diminished breaking through all at once. I buried my face in my palms and sobbed like I hadn't since my mother's funeral. Every insult, every dismissal, every whispered "she doesn't matter" came flooding back, suffocating me in that little kitchen. At one point, I even thought about pulling back the letter I sent to the board. Maybe this wasn't worth it. Maybe destroying what little family I had left was too high a price. My phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen through blurry eyes. Amaris. My sister. For a second, my heart lifted. Maybe she understood. Maybe someone was finally calling to ask if I was okay, not to demand an explanation. "Venora," her voice came through, sharp and already edged with judgment. "What are you doing? Damon's losing it. You've pushed too far." I sat there in silence, pressing my lips together so hard they ached. "You're making things worse," she continued. "Maybe you should apologize. Just fix this before it goes beyond repair." The line between despair and fury is thinner than people think. I felt it snap inside me. "Amaris," I said, my voice low and shaking. "If you called to lecture me, don't bother. I've done enough apologizing for a lifetime." "Venora, don't." I ended the call. I couldn't listen to her side with them. Not tonight. I put the phone face down on the table and stared at the quiet kitchen again, feeling more alone than I had in years. It was one thing for Damon to dismiss me, but hearing my own sister speak like that, it cut deeper than I expected. At some point, I got up and wandered into my office. On the bookshelf was a photo I hadn't looked at in ages. Me at 24, standing in front of the company's first office at the ribbon cutting. I'd been so proud that day, so hopeful. I picked up the frame, running my thumb over the glass. "You built this, Venora," I whispered to myself. "Don't let them erase you." It wasn't much, just a small spark in a sea of darkness. But it was enough to remind me why I started this fight in the first place. I went to bed broken, but somewhere deep down, a voice whispered, "This isn't the end." By dawn, that voice had become a plan, sharp, deliberate, and unstoppable. I woke up before the sun rose, my head heavy from the night before, but my mind frighteningly clear. There was no room for tears now, no room for self-doubt. If Damon and the rest of them wanted to play dirty, I'd show them just how calculated I could be. As I sat at the edge of my bed, I noticed the emerald bracelet lying on the dresser. It had been a gift from my mother when Sterling Co. opened its second branch. I used to see it as a token of pride, proof that I was part of something bigger. Now it felt like a reminder of everything I had been robbed of. My voice, my credit, my place at the table. I fastened it on my wrist, not out of sentimentality, but as a quiet declaration they weren't going to erase me. By 7, I was in my home office with a pot of coffee strong enough to keep me steady. My laptop was open, files spread across the desk, my phone ready. I didn't hesitate as I scrolled through my contacts and pressed call. "David, it's me," I said when my financial advisor answered. My voice was even, detached. "I want everything liquidated, the full stake, effective immediately." There was a pause on the other end. "Venora, that's $27 million. Are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once I pull the trigger, there's no going back." I stared at the rows of framed family photos across my office wall, smiling faces at parties where I'd been the one footing the bill, but never the one in the spotlight. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I said, cutting off any hesitation. David sighed. "All right, I'll initiate the process. You'll get confirmation by end of day." When I hung up, I didn't allow myself to breathe just yet. There was more to do. By mid-morning, I had an appointment in downtown Chicago with Evelyn Cross, a corporate attorney I'd heard of through industry contacts. Evelyn had a reputation. Precise, unflinching, the kind of woman who didn't flinch when walking into a room full of men who underestimated her. Her office was sleek, understated, much like the woman herself. She greeted me with a firm handshake and a knowing smile. "Venora, I read over the documents you sent last night," she began as we sat across from each other. "You still hold a surprising amount of power in Sterling Co., far more than Damon likely realizes. And from what I see, you've been funding much of their operations personally." "Exactly," I said, feeling a rare flicker of validation. "And yet I'm the one they label as useless." Evelyn tilted her head, scanning me like she was measuring my resolve. "If you play this right, you don't just walk away. You walk away with leverage, enough to make them think twice before ever crossing you again." Leverage. The word rolled around in my head like a lifeline. After leaving Evelyn's office, I returned home and dove into my records. Every loan agreement, every email, every document I'd archived over the years came out of its folder. Buried within company expense reports, I found something that made my jaw tighten. A consulting fee wired to Damon's mistress, disguised as a legitimate business expense, but the dates told the real story. He was using company money to fund their little trips. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Proof. Finally, something tangible that could burn their carefully curated image to the ground. Evelyn's voice echoed in my mind. Power isn't just money. It's knowing when to use the truth. I leaned back, inhaling deeply. For the first time in days, I felt something close to calm. Not peace, but a colder, more focused kind of stillness. By late afternoon, I had outlined a plan that was equal parts simple and devastating. Liquidate my stake publicly, expose Damon's misuse of company funds, and force a reckoning at the next board meeting. They wanted me gone. Fine. But they'd pay for underestimating me. They thought I was useless. They had no idea what I was about to do. That afternoon, I walked into the company's boardroom, not as the discarded little sister, but as their worst nightmare. The air was as cold as the polished marble floors. Sterling Holdings' boardroom had always felt more like a stage than a workspace, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city and a glossy mahogany table big enough for a dozen egos. My heels clicked with purpose as I crossed the room, every eye on me. I didn't flinch. Not this time. I wore the emerald bracelet. It wasn't just jewelry today. It was a quiet declaration. I was no longer the girl in the corner, writing checks and taking scraps of gratitude. The murmurs stopped as I reached my chair. Damon leaned back at the head of the table, his arm draped casually over the chair beside him, where his so-called consultant, Marceline, sat in her tailored suit and cheap perfume. The audacity of having her here, at a board meeting, made my stomach twist, but I didn't let it show. "Venora," Damon said, drawing out my name like an insult. "This is a private company meeting. You don't belong here." I placed my leather folder on the table, meeting his gaze head-on. "I built this company as much as you did. Try telling me I don't belong." A few of the board members shifted uncomfortably. They knew the truth, whether they'd ever admit it out loud or not. Damon's smirk faltered for a second, and that was all I needed. "Let's be honest," I continued, my voice calm but cutting. "This company didn't grow on charm alone. It grew on hard contracts, smart investments, and money that came from more than one pocket. Mine included." Damon scoffed. Are we really going to do this? Drag family matters into a business meeting? I leaned forward slightly. You made it personal when you used my money to fund your affairs. His face reddened. Marceline flinched, her hand clutching the armrest like she wished she could disappear. Good. I opened my folder and slid a stack of documents across the table. These are the original incorporation papers for Sterling Co. My signature is right there. My stake isn't a formality. It's foundational. The room went still. One of the board members, a man who had spent years pretending I was invisible, cleared his throat and said, "She's correct. This gives her legal authority over major decisions." Evelyn, who sat silently at my side until now, spoke with that smooth, measured tone I'd come to respect. Our client has been unlawfully excluded from decision-making processes. Any actions taken without her consent are subject to legal challenge, including misuse of funds. Damon shot her a glare, but I didn't give him time to respond. I pulled out the second set of documents, company expense reports with key transfers highlighted. I tapped the page with my finger. Tell me, Damon, which department approved these consulting fees? The ones that coincidentally align with Marceline's little weekend getaways? Marceline went pale, whispering something frantically to Damon. He ignored her. This isn't just personal betrayal, I said, looking around the table. This is embezzlement, and every person in this room knows what happens when that gets out. A heavy silence fell over the boardroom. Even the men who'd once dismissed me were now avoiding Damon's gaze. They were doing the math, weighing the cost of loyalty to him against the cost of a public scandal. You're bluffing, Damon hissed, his voice low. If you think that, I replied coolly, wait until tomorrow when this hits the press. The room erupted with murmurs. One of the older board members spoke up, voice shaking slightly. Perhaps it's time we discuss a restructuring plan. Damon slammed his fist on the table, making Marceline jump. You're destroying this family! I didn't blink. You did that the day you used my money to fund your affair. I let the words hang in the air, heavy and undeniable. Then I straightened my back and said to the board, here's my offer. I liquidate my stake publicly unless Damon steps down as CEO and repays every cent misused. You can choose chaos or you can choose control. I don't care which. The board members exchanged glances. It didn't take long for the tide to turn. They'd spent years under Damon's thumb, but survival has a way of changing loyalties. One by one, they nodded, quietly aligning themselves with me. Damon looked at me, his expression a mix of rage and fear, and for the first time, I knew he saw me. Not as the quiet little sister, but as the woman who could burn everything he'd built to the ground. If you think I'm bluffing, Damon, I said, my voice steady as stone. Wait until tomorrow when this hits the press. Damon's face twisted with rage as he slammed his fist on the table, but the fear in his eyes told me everything. I had him cornered. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every word from the boardroom, every insult Damon had thrown at me over the years, every time I'd bitten my tongue for the sake of family peace. My chest felt heavy, like I was holding decades of silence inside me. At one point, I sat up and turned on the lamp, staring at the emerald bracelet resting on my nightstand. It used to be a token of his approval, a way to say, you're useful when you're quiet. Now it was mine, a reminder of who I'd become. By morning, the anxiety had turned to something sharper. My phone buzzed relentlessly on the nightstand, dozens of missed calls, unknown numbers. I knew that sound. Scandal. I grabbed it and saw the headlines. Sterling heiress accused of embezzlement, declared mentally unstable by sources close to the family. Damon didn't waste any time. I scrolled through the articles, fabricated bank statements, laughable claims about me misusing company funds, and a disgusting insinuation that I wasn't of sound mind. It was all calculated. Damon trying to make me look like an unhinged woman out for revenge, A convenient narrative, one he'd been building for years. My hands trembled, but I steadied myself with a breath. Evelyn answered my call on the first ring. "Don't let this rattle you," she said. Her voice was firm, like she'd been expecting this. "We anticipated he'd smear you. You have something he doesn't, real proof, and we're about to use it." I clung to her words as I poured a coffee I couldn't drink. It felt like my whole life was being chewed up and spit out by strangers who didn't know me. But deep down, I knew. This was his last move before he fell. By mid-morning, an emergency board session had been scheduled. Damon wanted to push me out officially, no doubt to clean up the mess I'd made for him. Evelyn met me at the building. She was a calm presence in a storm I couldn't fully control, her tailored suit crisp, her briefcase full of my ammunition. When we walked into the boardroom, Damon was already there, posturing like a man who still thought he had power. Marceline sat beside him, pale and jittery, avoiding my eyes. The board members looked tense, caught between a CEO trying to strong-arm them and a woman who had nothing left to lose. "This meeting is to address the actions of my sister," Damon began, feigning composure. "Her reckless behavior, her abuse of company resources." I cut him off. "Save it." I opened my folder and slid a stack of documents across the table. "You want to talk about abuse of company resources? Let's discuss these." The top page showed detailed transfers from Sterling Holdings accounts, thousands labeled as consulting fees, to a shell company that led straight to Marceline. The room erupted in murmurs. "This is fabricated," Damon snapped, but his voice cracked. "No," I said, meeting every pair of eyes in that room. "This is embezzlement. And here's the kicker. Recorded conversations where Damon admits to using company funds for personal expenses. That's right. I brought receipts." Evelyn handed out flash drives to the board, her expression neutral, but her eyes burning with quiet satisfaction. "You'll find every document verified and time-stamped. If this goes public, we're talking criminal liability." Marceline stood abruptly, muttering, "I didn't sign up for this," before rushing out of the room. Damon didn't try to stop her. "You can smear me all you want," I said, leaning forward. "Call me unstable, call me bitter, but the numbers don't lie, Damon. You used my trust fund as your personal wallet. You paid for her vacations with company money. You betrayed not just me, but everyone sitting at this table." One of the older board members spoke up. "This is damning. Damon, we can't ignore this." "You can't take this company from me," Damon shouted, sweat beading at his temple. I stayed calm. "You're right. I can't, but the board can. And unless you step down as CEO and repay every cent you stole, they'll have no choice but to protect themselves." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Damon looked around the room, searching for someone to defend him. No one did. Evelyn slid a set of documents across the table. "Resignation papers. Sign them. Or we move forward with criminal charges." For the first time in my life, I watched my brother sweat like a man cornered. He picked up the pen with a trembling hand. The sound of his signature scratching across the paper was the sweetest thing I'd ever heard. When he finished, he pushed the papers toward me without looking up. It was over. I watched Damon's signature bleed across the page, and for the first time in years, I felt truly free. But freedom, I realized, wasn't just about winning. It was about deciding what came next. 3 months later, my life felt almost unrecognizable. The legal battles had ended quietly. Damon had stepped down in disgrace. The board had publicly announced a leadership restructuring, and my accounts, had been restored. Evelyn called it a clean victory. But as I stood in my condo, overlooking the rippling waters of Lake Michigan, I understood something she hadn't said. Victory can feel empty when you've spent so long just surviving. I leaned against the glass wall, taking in the view. My new condo wasn't just an upgrade in location, it was a declaration. Gone were the stiff, soulless family portraits that used to hang in my old house. Now, the walls were lined with my own photographs, women in quiet moments of resilience, weathered buildings that somehow stood after decades of neglect, snapshots of life I'd captured when I thought I was falling apart. It wasn't polished like the corporate spaces Damon loved. It was mine. Evelyn came by one afternoon, holding 2 cups of coffee and a bottle of champagne tucked under her arm. "You've done it, Venora," she said as she walked in, giving the place a sweeping look. "You didn't just survive that storm. You built a new ship." I laughed softly. It doesn't always feel that way. Some mornings, I wake up expecting another fire to put out. She handed me the coffee and raised an eyebrow. "That's because you've lived in survival mode for years. This is different. This is yours." Her words stayed with me even after she left. I wandered through the rooms, touching the framed photos, the small sculptures, the emerald bracelet that now sat in a shadow box by the window. I'd had a custom plaque made for it, Freedom. It once symbolized Damon's approval, his way of controlling the narrative. Now it was a trophy of reclamation. That evening, I found myself at the opening of my first photography exhibit. I hadn't planned for it to be so personal, but the curator insisted on featuring my portraits of women overcoming hardship. As I walked through the gallery, hearing strangers speak about my work like it mattered, I felt something I hadn't in years: purpose beyond all of this mess. A young woman, maybe 22, approached me hesitantly. She wore an oversized coat and had the nervous energy of someone new to this world. "Are you Venora?" she asked. I smiled. "I am." She shifted her weight, glancing at the photo of an older woman smiling despite tear-streaked cheeks. "Your work, it gave me hope. I didn't think people like us could fight back. But you did. And you won." For a moment, I saw myself in her. The girl who once thought silence was safer than speaking, who handed over her power for the illusion of family unity. I reached out and squeezed her hand gently. "It's not just about winning," I said. "It's about realizing they can't write your story for you." After she left, I lingered by the shadow box with the emerald bracelet. Guests passed by, reading the small plaque. Some asked about its story. I just smiled. "It used to mean belonging to someone else," I'd tell them. "Now it means belonging to myself." As the evening wound down, I stepped outside into the crisp Chicago air. For a brief moment, I considered calling Damon. Part of me wondered if closure needed words, if an ending required a conversation. But then I shook my head. Some stories don't need epilogues. They just need endings. I pulled my coat tighter, inhaled the cold night air, and smiled. I had walked away from everything they tried to define me by, and I was still standing, stronger than before. They called me useless, but here I am, living proof that the pieces they tried to break can make something stronger than before. Have you ever rebuilt your life after someone tried to take it apart? Share your story in the comments. I read every one.